Okay, so this is the final session, the bonus session of section 1 of the Sefer Yetzirah, which is in the Gra version, chapter 1, Mishnah 8. And this is a bonus session because we basically covered everything that I wanted to cover. Obviously, you can spend much more time on it, and there are different ways of interpreting the Sefer Yetzirah and unpacking all the even more detail there. But I think we've covered most of the ground, and this one is to be a bonus one. And then we'll move on to something else. So I want to just kind of get a summary and overview of what we've done so far. I'm going to share the screen. Roland, you've already got this in front of you. Well, you should have it in front of you anyway. It's just the first section, just what chapters 1, Mishnahs 1 to 8. Okay, so with this first Mishnah, with this first section, what I notice and what kind of has come out, this has been a learning process for me also, kind of delving into it. It's really kind of a deep reflection on what's there. And so for me, stuff has emerged. And what I noticed is that you can see a pairing system that takes place. So if you want to come to next to me, you'll see what's in front of me here. That's why I think this visual format for the Sefer Yetzirah is really helpful, and we'll see more of it as we go through. But what I notice is that there's a pairing between the different Mishnah. So obviously we have an even number here, but we see that Mishnahs 1 and 2 reflect each other. Mishnah 1 talks about the 32 paths, and then Mishnah 2 speaks about just defines them, 10 sfirot, 22 letters. And then we see kind of more pairings happening, and we see this one in the commentaries as well, or at least in the Gra's commentary. So we see Mishnah 3, which talks about the singular covenant and the 5 fingers opposite 5 corresponds or parallels. Obviously, there are connections all over the place, so that covenant manifests in Mishnah 8. But I find that how we've kind of gone through it is that the third Mishnah has come to, or the third Mishnah is paired up with Mishnah number 5. So the third Mishnah talks about 5 opposite 5, and then the Mishnah 5 talks about what those 5 opposite 5 are, the different depths of pairs of opposites. And we also have the singularity there. We have Adon Yachid, we have Brit Yachid in Mishnah 3, we have Adon Yachid in Mishnah 5. So that's the second pairing. Then the third pairing would be Mishnah 4 with Mishnah 7, which is where we kind of finished off last week. So we see Mishnah 4 talks about Eser Sfirot Blima, and it talks about 9, 10 and not Tesha, Eser v'lo Tesha, 10 and not 9, Eser v'lo Achadesre, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, understand with wisdom, be wise with understanding. So we see this kind of movement between the Sfirot, and we saw how the Gra said that Mishnah number 7, which talks about depth of beginning, or not depth, the end is embedded in the beginning, and the beginning is embedded in the end, how that corresponds to why we might come to say 10 and not 9 and not 10, and again with the parallels. I mean, again, but this again, it does parallel Mishnah number 5 also, these depths, these this ends in the end embedded at the beginning and the beginning and the end through the depths. So, but again, that's not how we've kind of interpreted, and we will be coming back to it. This is, for me, this is the central, the foundation stone of the whole Sefer Yetzirah, and we'll be coming back to it, reverting back to it all the time. I feel this is the really dense. There is so much stuff in this section here, and when we look in the next section, the way I've seen it up until now is that it's not as kind of content dense as this particular section. Although again, going through the process may kind of unpack different areas there, so may show that there's actually more stuff there than what I originally anticipated. So how we've interpreted it is we've gone through mission number 7 comes to expand upon mission number 4, and that's the third pairing. Then the fourth pairing is mission number 6 and mission number 8. Both of them talk about the experience of the Sefirot, how we come to an understand vision of it. So the number 6 talks about how we come to a vision of the Sefirot. They both reference this idea of Ratzu V'Shov, running and returning. And we saw how mission number 8 gives us the practice of meditation from this, or the practice of meditation of Maaseh Merkava, how we come to an feeling, some kind of experience of the Sefirot Blima, and how the Sefirot Blima, their vision is like the appearance of lightning in mission number 6, and how there is aspects of Ratzu V'Shov there, okay, just like in mission number 8. So we see this pairing there. What I noticed, and what I've kind of tried to emphasize in this particular section. So again, we have to always go back to what is this all about. So again, I always go back to defer to the Reb Tzadok Kohen of Lublin, because he brings this whole concept, the whole project of the Kabbalah is to come to an understanding and an experience of God's unity. And there are 2 levels of God's unity, and the first level, which we think is what we saw last week, of V'yadata hayom v'hashevot alevavecha ki Hashem Elokim b'shamayim v'ha'aretz b'tachat en od. I think that's it, if I remember correctly. We come to an understanding that we should know and reflect on it. V'hashevot alevavecha, we shall again return to it again and again, just like with meditation, we return to it again and again. A contemplation, understanding that God is Hashem is the God in heaven and on earth, and there is nothing else. So that is what we record Maaseh Merkava. That is what Reb Tzadok calls Maaseh Merkava, and that's what we saw within Aruch HaShulchan and the Izhbitsa Rebbe last week as well. Gershon, third Izhbitsa Rebbe, as the upper waters, or the upper unity, which is what Zohar talks about. So these are kind of this idea of, this is what we kind of come to see in this aspect here. But then later on we'll see that we're now moving into Yehuda Tata, the lower unity, which is Maaseh Bereshit, the recognition that the whole of creation, the whole of the universe is the expression of a singular God, Adon Yachid, and how again this whole process comes back to this single idea of Ratzu V'Shov. Even Maaseh Bereshit is Ratzu V'Shov. But what I think I mentioned right at the beginning, but I kind of forgot about it, and I kind of remembered it yesterday. So it was great, the Hashgacha Pratit, in that sense, that I remembered this idea yesterday as I was kind of reflecting on this. I went through with somebody else, and it kind of sparked in my mind that idea. So we've been talking about this whole thing is the Sefirot of Bliman. So I think it was on Shabbat, I decided to kind of have a look, because I noticed a while back the Arizal's commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah, on the Sefer Yetzirah. It's not very long, but it kind of troubled me a little bit, because I didn't really get what he was talking about, and I decided to kind of look at it on Shabbat, and I'm not saying I understand it fully, but it gave me an idea about how the Ari sees these things. So when he says the Sefirot Blima, the Sefirot that the Sefer Yetzirah talks about, is a reference to Olam HaNikudim, which is Olam HaTohu, the universe of desolation, of emptiness. And the Olam HaNikudim is also the world where the Shvira comes from. So this is the second manifestation of the world. So again, I have this feeling that there's also reference to Olam HaNikudim. So let me take 2 steps back. So within Arizal's Kabbalah, he refers to 3 creative processes. This is after the tzimtzum, which is the contraction of the light of the infinite, or Ein Sof. So he says the first creation, the first emanation from the first creative process, which is Olam, which is Adam Kadmon, which we mentioned before. So when the universe of Atzilut comes into existence, the first emergence of that is called Olam HaAkudim. And in Olam HaAkudim, it means, what does it mean? Striped. One of them striped, banded, or striped, or banded, I can't remember. Or bound, or akud, like the Akedah, it means bound. So within that it says that there were 10 lights and one vessel. Everything was unified. And so for me, this seems to be what we're referring to here in this whole Sefer Yetzirah, that there is a single unity here, even though we talk about 10, actually it's one. So I have a feeling, an intuition that Olam HaKodim seems quite connected with this idea. There is one vessel and 10 lights. Again, but the Arizal, this is why I had a problem with what Arizal said about Olam HaNekudim. But in Olam HaNekudim, there are separate pieces. There are separate. Each Sephirah is separate. So again, it requires more kind of looking into it. But the reason why it's relevant is because Olam HaNekudim is referred to as Olam HaTohu, the universe of desolation. And the Arizal's explanation for that is quite good, because we see that Blima, the without whatness, is the same concept as the emptiness of Tohu, of nothingness there. And also we see in the next section also why, another reason why it gives me reason to kind of look at that really in that sense, is because there is an explicit reference to Tohu, which we'll see again in the remainder of the first chapter. But again, so this idea is that there is an emptiness here, there is a barrenness here, there is a silence here, and a previous creation, something before the actual creation. He talks about the speech as some kind of, it's really difficult to understand that I read there, but it seems to be that he says that speech is a rectification process, that singular covenant is a way of bringing reconciliation between the separateness of the Sfirot. So he again brings this idea that is a way of bridging, bringing things together. Again, I see this is something which I'm just raising as an idea.
It's interesting, because if you didn't have any speech, you wouldn't have separation in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems exactly like when we're saying, your speech is that which defines something. So that's why, again, I guess
speech is creation. The split of heaven and earth is placed by Hashem's speech.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to again, that's something which I need to probably look into a little more and just get a greater clarity on that one. In any case, I brought up because we see that there is a process of taking place there, and Olam the idea of Olam HaTohu, Olam HaNekudim, this separateness, or this beyond the ability to comprehend, beyond speech, the place of brokenness as well. This is the idea of blima, that which can't be spoken, which is behind speeches, is nothingness, right? And what I realized is that as I was, again, the reason I brought that is because I was reflecting on it and I wanted to move on to this next section. So what I realized as I was going over it is, I already mentioned that in Mishnah 3, bemilat halashon, the singular covenant, the brit hayachid, the singular covenant, is within the milat halashon, the circumcision of the tongue. Now, I already kind of, for me, originally I read it as a slip of the tongue. I said belimat halashon, the withholding of the tongue. There's a permutation of that one, and I realized, wait a minute, it's belimat halashon is a permutation of bemilat halashon.
Bemilat, yeah. That's very interesting.
But also, it's the circumstance again. You just preempted me. So bemilat halashon is with the word of the tongue, right? So the milah Is that what you were thinking about?
No.
No.
Milah.
So milah means a circumcision, but it also means a word. It's the same. It's the same word. It's the same word. Yeah. So mal means to speak, and mal is to circumcise as well. But it's again obviously mem yud lamed aleph.
Sorry, mem yud
lamed aleph. Hey.
Interesting. So also about filling. Mem lamed aleph as well, isn't it?
Mem lemalot, yeah. Yeah.
Circumcision very different to stopping.
Right, so it's opposite. So
it's a rachamim function, container, kind of harness of circumcision, isn't it?
Well,
possibly.
Well, I mean, maybe. Yeah, I guess it's revelation, isn't it? The orla could be considered that which is doing the withholding, and then the milah, the circumcision, is what allows for the for speech. Now for the activity, it kind of reveals that thing. So yes, there is a connection to that. But anyway, that's why I say is that it's a permutation of it. So just like we see the keter, karet, oneg, nega, ani, and ayin, these permutations. So we have milah, and we have bemilah, and we have blima. We have bemilah and blima. So blima is bemilah with the word is a permutation of blima. So I realized that, wait a minute, maybe that's what the fact that whether what Ari picks up on that, it's that the reason why he says it's alama tohu is because it's sfirot blima. So there is the sfirot of blima, but there are also sfirot therefore of bemilah. There are sfirot which are spoken, and sfirot which are with the word. And that's how they manifest differently. So that's why we see next section. And this will be something we should look at next section. That we'll see that that word comes into play. That suddenly the sfirot are associated with speaking with the letters and the language. Okay. So with all this, we see that, again, that's why I brought the unity theme here. So here is a nice little visual there for you. Actually, I'm going to save that visual. But what I've got here is the unity theme. So I've kind of highlighted certain elements of this. So playot refers to keter, which is unification. Chochma, again, is alam atzilut, which we'll be speaking about. That which is beyond. So Roland, kindly found for me a nice idea from, who was it from?
Shlomo Eliashib. This morning?
Yes. The first one.
And Alkabetz.
From Alkabetz. So yeah. So he said. I'll read it to you later. But what Rav Alkabetz there says is that there is that beyond thought there is what he refers to as afisata machshava. So this occurs. This is a word which appears at quite a few places in medieval Kabbalah. Afisata machshava is the effacement or the efes means zero, the nullification, the annihilation of thought. So chokhmah. So with Bria is machshava, chokhmah is afisata machshava, the effacement, the nullification of thought. So that's what we see chokhmah here as a theme of unity here. Again, 10, we see 10 in the next section. We start seeing numbers 1, 2, 3. So here it's always 10, 10, 10. So 10 is an idea of unity. Blima is a theme of unity. The Brit Yachid, the singular covenant. So I've seen it also. Ari Kaplan brings in his commentary. Brit Yachid, some have said is or has Brit Yichud, a covenant of unity, as opposed to Brit as a singular covenant. Something Roland mentioned a few weeks ago. We have Bemilat Lashon, Bemilat Ma'or, again, like what we've spoken about just now. And then Adon Yechid appears a few times. Adon Yechid here in mission number 5. Adon Yechid here in mission number 7, which we saw last week. The Ratzu Bashov, this continuity, again, of Alkabetz says in that quotation, which I'll quote right at the end, that Afisata Machshava is connected with Ratzon Vashov, running and returning. And how it's connected with silence, with Belom Pichem Ledaber, with what before even counting, before one word that we count. And how it's connected with the Torah. So we see, this is my next one. There we go. Brit is Gematria Ratzon Vashov. So Ratzon Vashov again is that same principle. And that's the same gematria Ratzon Vashov, and also is the gematria of Torah. Oh, hold on a minute! I just realized that it's paused, so you can't see that visual. Let me unpause it, and you can see the visual. There you go. Bonus. This is, you can't see all of it, but you'll see that in when we look at the next sections. And here it is. A good use of time that one was. Brit is gematria Ratzon Vashov. So what is the connection with the Brit and the Torah and these ideas of unity? So this is kind of why it's the bonus section. So first of all, Brit is Ratzon Vashov. Now I also mentioned the pasuk we've been talking about is Yeshev Bedad V'Yidom. So Yeshev Bedad V'Yidom, I said was a gematria of HaTorah. So we have Torah, which is Ratzon Vashov, and Vashov is the idea of sitting, of Shabbat, of returning, of yeshiva, going to yeshiva, of learning and sitting and deliberating. Yashivut is deliberation, learning, like in that kind of sense. And so therefore it's more in the sense of Yeshev Badad V'Yidom, which is HaTorah. So Yeshev Badad V'Yidom is the gematria of HaTorah. Sit alone, let him sit alone and be silent, for God has placed it upon him. And so this is something, if you look up this pasuk in Pirkei Avot, I'm not sure which chapter it is, but there is in Pirkei Avot the rabbis have a discussion about what is the merit of Torah study and how the divine presence dwells within people who are between a group who are learning Torah. At the end of it, they said, how do we know that even an individual who studies Torah receives merit? It says, and they bring a quote, which is this quote, Yeshev Badad V'Yidom ki natal alav. So normally it's translated as, let him sit alone and be silent, for God has placed this upon him, or he has placed this upon him. The rabbis interpret ki natal alav as the person himself is notel alav. The person itself is acquires something. Nitila means placing or acquiring. So like nitilat yadayim. So you acquire something, and what does that mean? He's Yeshev Badad V'Yidom, let him sit alone and be silent, because through that, sitting alone and being silent, he will acquire something from it. He will receive a reward from it. So that's what they understood Yeshev Badad V'Yidom as studying Torah. And so the relevance of this is that this idea of Torah or Oraita in Aramaic plays a part in this bonus text we're going to look at. Now, you've already seen this text, we've done it before, but for the sake of completion, in this sense, I thought it would be unfair not to include this particular text because it really is quite relevant. Okay. So this text, I'm going to share the screen with you here. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share a new screen with you. So a few years back, I providentially came across a text from the Radzina Rebbe, the second Radzina Rebbe. So last week we looked at the third Radzina Rebbe, this week is the second Radzina Rebbe. He wrote a book called Beit Yaakov, which is a commentary on the Parsha, and quotes extensively from his father's work, the Meir Shalach. And so again, the Meir Shalach was the teacher of the Beit Yaakov and of Reb Tzadok HaKohen of the Blimna, who we're looking at also. So there's all part of the same Torah here. So this is an amazing, really long piece from the Beit Yaakov on Parashat Truma, which is, I guess, coming up. And I've translated some of it, and this is a summary of the section on my website. On the website, And we're going to look at the translation I've put, but this is the summary I've put here. So in that section, the Beit Yaakov is quoting the Zohar. So the Zohar says that there are two paths, there are two ways of coming to know God. What I write here is the twin paths of divine service, and these twin paths are referred to as Ishtadlut de'oraita, the striving, Hishtadlut in the Hebrew, the effort, the energy, the endeavor. What would be the best word for Hishtadlus? The effort towards of Torah, Ishtadlut de'oraita, and Ishtadlut de mitzvah. The opposite of that is the striving towards mitzvah. And the Zohar, there it says that the Ishtadlut de'oraita is cheap. It is very cheap. It is cheap, and in fact, it is free. And we'll see what that means. Well, at some point, we'll see what that means. And the Ishtadlut de mitzvah, which is an expensive thing. So what he's saying is that there are two ways. Again, I'm just going to read it straight out. There are two ways of coming to know God. And the Beit Yaakov explains what the Zohar is referring to. So the easy way is to look within, right? So the easy way is to find God on the inside. The Beit Yaakov, so I'm summarizing in this section here, but the Beit Yaakov talk goes, it's quite a complicated little piece, but the Beit Yaakov comes and explains it, and actually there's different places where it explains it better, or in more concise fashion. But the easy way to come to know God is what is referred to as the Ishtadlut de'oraita. So the Beit Yaakov explains that inscribed on the tablets of the heart is a book of the history of God and the universe. Within the heart, we see that this is a reference to personal providence, hashgacha pratit, that every single one of us has a personal guide. God is personally guiding us, and if we look at ourselves, look at our lives, we can see that thread moving through it, and through that we can come to through this book one can come to a profound revelation of God as the guiding spirit and director of the entire universe. So that's what the Beit Yaakov explains there. But because it's easy, because this knowledge comes easily, it is easily forgotten, right? And it's the heart's desires, the distraction of this world, and the clouding of awareness obscure the understanding. And these are key elements I've picked out, which we're going to see in the actual translation itself, and maybe we'll look at the Hebrew as well. These are the elements that obscure our reality. And now this next bit is something which we're going to be experiencing. So we're going to be coming on to later. I'll read the whole of it so you have it there. You can see it in front of you anyway. But these twin paths of what I call wisdom and action are what we're going to see throughout the Sefer Yetzirah. And we're going to see these different elements. It is Ratzu V'Shov, it is Torah, and it is Mitzvah. These really key principles here. And a really kind of amazing concept. So maybe we'll have to go more deeply into the Beit Yaakov, this section on Parashat Truma at some point. Let me just finish it for the sake of completion there. So he says that this knowledge that is easily forgotten. So you've had this revelation, great revelation of God. You've suddenly experienced God in the world, but then you forget it. So even though you forget it, the knowledge leaves a remnant, a seed within your experience. And it is in our everyday lives, in our everyday actions, that I read this ages ago, so I think the actualization of faith is how I've interpreted what he writes there. I think it's the same. Actually, I think he does talk about it, maybe as the actualization of faith. So the actualization of faith, which means when we live our lives and to carry out our daily activities through faith and through a knowledge that God is here, then that seed germinates and the sapling grows. Meaning that we can come to see God more deeply. And I didn't say this, but what the Beit Yaakov says, that there are deeper truth, deeper Torah within the mitzvah than there is in the Torah itself. So even though, because we can come easily to understand, to see God within Torah, within this Izhbitsa Rebbe, but the true depth of Torah is in the mitzvahs themselves, and that's possibly because the mitzvahs are beyond speech. Anyway, that's just a little thing that we might touch on later on. He carries on with his ideas. He says that it is God's desire that His glory should pervade the entire earth, meaning that man's heart should be full of God's knowledge. And this is the work of spiritual practice. So again, this is both from Izhbitsa Rebbe and Izhbitsa Mitzvah, that we come to this sense that there is a pervasive presence of God in the world. So let's now look at Izhbitsa Rebbe. Okay, so this section here, again, it's a really, really amazing section from that same section of Parashat Truma, Beit Yaakov, and it's got a few elements here that are relevant to us. So first of all, it talks about the mitzvah, the Ten Commandments. Now I'm just going to go into the Hebrew. I'm going to leave this English translation up. I'll pause the share. I'm going to read it to you in Hebrew. There is actually the first section I'm going to read for you is not translated, but I will translate it for you. But I'll translate it for you as you go, and you'll see, you can follow along with the translation. והנה בגלות מצרים, אחר שנתבררו על ידי סבלנותם ובקריאת ים סוף, שהאמינו בהשם ויצאו למדבר ארץ צייה. So it says, before what he just said beforehand, so this is in the middle of a section, so what he just said beforehand, I basically just summarized most of it. But he's saying, that carries on, goes here, so behold, see that during the exile of Egypt, during the exile of Egypt, after they suffered, or after they were cleansed, they were purified through their servitude. So that's one aspect, that the servitude of Egypt purified the Jewish people. And the second aspect is that during the splitting of the Red Sea, that they believed in Hashem. So that belief in Hashem is the second aspect. And then the third aspect is and they went out into the desert, the wilderness, in an unsown land, in a barren land. As is written, God is reflecting on how you followed me in the desert, in a land which is not sown. Beit Yaakov continues. ולכן מחמת זה השפיע השם יתברך שכינתו See, I've edited this. I've taken this from an edit that I made from a badly written, or from a difficult to read print. I'm just trying to tell what I've written here. I'm not sure what I've written. I think I made a mistake with editing. So he says that God, and therefore, so because they suffered and they were purified through their servitude, because they believed in Hashem in the Yam Suf and the Red Sea, and during the following God in the desert, because of this, God caused His Shekhinah to descend, as it is written, Vayarad Hashem al Har Sinai, that God descended upon Har Sinai. V'gedeiti b'Zohar HaKodesh, and the Zohar said, Nachit b'darga, b'dargoi medarga, b'darga, ומקיטרה לקיטרה, עד שדבר, שדיבר עם כל ישראל, כל אחד כפום מדרגתו. So the Zohar says that God descended through steps, from one step to another step, and from one crown, which is from one sphera to another sphera, until he reached to the point that he could speak to all the children of Israel, to all the whole nation of Israel, every single individual, according to his level. And at that moment, all the Torah, all the Divrei Torah. So again, this is this idea of Divrei Torah. It's like a theme within the Torah of Izhbitsa Rebbe, referring to faith or revelation of God, Kavod Shamayim. How I've heard from the current Rebbe in Arabia. Kol divrei Torah nigalim uftuchim. All the divrei Torah, all this glory of heaven, was revealed and opened up. Ki Torah he gam kodem. And so what does he say? What does that mean? What do you mean it was revealed? So and opened up. And he comes on and he says, because really, in reality, HaTorah haya gam kodem b'riyat ha'olam. He says the Torah existed even before the creation of the universe. Torah already existed before then. And we see this in the Midrash. It says that God looked into the Torah and created the universe. The Torah was a blueprint for creation. And now he comes along and he explains even further. He says, he says that the 10 Diberot, when we're speaking about Diberot and Ma'amarot, the 10 commandments and the 10 sayings of creation, these different ways of talking about speech. He says that the 10 commandments are precisely the same 10 as the 10 Ma'amarot of creation. So they're exactly the same things. Even though the Ma'amarot sound different, they're written different, they say different things. He says again, this is room for what does that mean? Therefore, like we see clearly that the Diberot, the commandments are different to the Ma'amarot if we look in the Parsha. So again, we have to look at it from a kind of metaphorical level. So he's saying that possibly the Dibera, the way it manifests as a Dibera, is that kind of there's a manifestation of this one or these 10 things as Diberot, and there's a manifestation of these same 10 things as Ma'amarot, and they appear differently. We see that the Chazal explained that Dibera, that Davar and Ma'am and Amar, they're two words for expressing, they're two words for speech. But they said that Dibur is a Lashon of, so we see this in Vayomer and Vaydaber. So God, oftentimes we see Vayomer or Vayomar, God says, and Vaydaber, God speaks to Moshe or to whoever it is in the Torah. We see that the Chazal say that Dibur is a Lashon of there's a Givura there, there's a strength there, there's a harshness there. Amirah is a softness there. So when God created the universe, he created it through a softness, through Amirah. When he gave the 10 commandments, he gave it through a sense of strength, and so that could explain the difference to it. But also we have to realize that the Sfirot, we see that the Ma'amar and the Dibur come from the Sfirot. They are the expansion of the Sfirot. So we see how the Diberot, when they were given on Har Sinai, they were given on 2 tablets, 5, and on one tablet was 5 of the commandments, and another tablet was another 5 of the commandments. Again, we see a splitting between the Sfirot, 5 opposite 5, and that is the Da'at, where it is the Brit Halashon, the covenant of the tongue, which comes to separate between the two things. So we the Sfirot, the Diberot and the Ma'amarot of creation, Diberot of Har Sinai and the Ma'amarot of creation, are really the Sfirot in an active form. So they are the same. They are the Sfirot when they come into an aspect of speech. So Ma'amar is Olam Yetzirah, we saw from the ground. Dibur is Olam Asiyah. So that can explain how this works. There is a Torah that exists in Asiyah, a Torah that exists in Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilut. So that's why it's the same thing, because they're all part of the Sfirot there. So he says that these 10, but again, he's specifically talking about Diberot and Ma'amarot because he wants us to recognize something very specific here. He wants us to, and we'll see what that is. He says, realize, no, ki aseret Diberot hemma asara Ma'amarot sheha'olam nivra b'hem. No, that he doesn't say no, but I think it's implied. No, that the 10 Commandments are those same 10 expressions of creation that God used to create the universe. Kebazar Kodesh, like the Zohar says, Hashem mehaveh tamid et haolam. Hashem medaber itam otam or itam hadiberot tamid. So Zohar says that God is continually creating, manifesting in the universe, and that Hashem medaber itam hadiberot, He is speaking those 10 commandments continuously. So if God created the universe, and then God speaks the 10 commandments, and they are the same thing, that means that God is continually saying, they are repeated over and over and over and over again. And now he brings no, I've lost myself now. Okay, so he brings another Zohar. He says, "Kedeita b'Zohar Kodesh al hapasuk, upon the pasuk kol gadol v'lo yasaf." So he actually doesn't bring the Zohar there, but it's a really interesting midrash actually on that. Pasuk says, "Kol gadol v'lo yasaf." There was a single voice and no more. So the midrash on this pasuk says that with that one voice, every one of the prophets prophesies. So the prophets only heard one voice. This is the midrash, not even the Zohar, before the midrash. There was a single voice that was spoken at Har Sinai, and every single one of the prophets prophesied from that same voice. And the Zohar, I haven't looked in the Zohar here, but it's possibly the same concept that he says that the Zohar says that God continually maintains the universe with a single great voice. And then he brings a Gemara. Again, this is a Gemara talking about something else, but he brings a Gemara there nevertheless. V'chol yom vayom bat kol yotzah mehar chorev. He says that every single the Gemara says that every single day a bat kol, a voice of prophecy, or a daughter, maybe it's the daughter of that great voice, emerges day after day. A bat kol really is an echo, actually. So an echo kind of emerges, bounces up, and reflects from Har Sinai every single day. And what is that single voice? He carries on. Perush, the explanation of this. Hashem Yitbarach en lo shinoi chas v'shalom. The explanation of what we've all been talking about. What we've just been talking about, the Gemara, the Pasuk, and the Zohar's commentary on it. What the Zohar said that God's continually creating the universe. The Esir to Dibirot, the same as the Asra Ma'amarot. He says, Hashem Yitbarach en lo shinoi chas v'shalom. He says that with God we cannot bring the possibility, the conception that there is change or differentiation within him. There is no, God is not bound by time or by change. So you cannot say that we cannot say that at the beginning God didn't speak. And now he started to speak. And then he will stop from speaking. Can't say that. This is a really, really critical point. רק מחמת הרעש והתרדות של עולם הזה, שהעולם מורגשת תמיד ברצונות שלה, הם המבדילים, שלא יכנסו דברי תורה לגוף. This is a beautiful, amazing concept here. That the reason why we cannot hear God speaking is because the shaking or the noise and the distractions of this world, that this world is continually pestering us with its desires and its wills, and this separates us from the Divrei Torah, which want to enter into the body. The Divrei Torah meaning the revelation of God, revelation of God's knowledge, the glory of God. And therefore, because of these distractions and the noise and our will and desires, we can't hear the Diberot from Hashem. We can't hear the 10 Commandments. We can't hear God speaking them because God is speaking them. B'shat Matan Torah, But at the time of Matan Torah, when God gave us the commandment, God silenced and He quietened down the distractions of this world, the hamniot, va'kochot, and those things, those barriers that prevent us from the barriers that exist and the forces which exist. And how He explains what these things are. Hainu ta'avot haguf. These are the cravings and desires of the body. She'enam manichim la'adam she'yishme'u hadiberot. That these cravings don't let up for a minute, and they don't allow a person to hear the diberot. So they can't distinguish the diberot. You can't distinguish it. The sound is always there. You can't hear it because the noise in our minds is too loud. It's always there, he says. But we can't hear it because the noise of the universe is too loud. The noise of our cravings is too loud. And therefore we can't lehavdilo. We can't distinguish them. We can't distinguish the voice of God from the voice of our own cravings and passions and desires. Hizdakechut hadat balam. And at the time of Matan Torah, there was a hizdakechut, there was a purification, a refinement, a polishing of awareness, of da'at. Again, we see da'at here again, this idea of belief that da'at is that same covenant, the same brit between the speech and the silence. There was a purification of that awareness in the world. And because of that purification of consciousness, they of themselves heard the diberot from Hashem Yitbarach. That was God, that He speaks them continuously. And they saw the divrei Torah, they saw the glory of God, the kavod shemaim, the realization that God is here. And this is referred to as the effort of the Kutsh Abricha, which is the whole sentence that the Torah says, the Mindale, which is the Ishtadlut De'oraita, same thing. The striving of Torah, the striving of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu to know Him, Mindale, right? And he says, Bezot hi bechinam. This is free, right? It doesn't sound like it's free, but this is free. This is the easy way. Quietening down our senses, bypassing our cravings. Sound is there. God's voice is already there. Purification of awareness. And that voice of God continuously speaking arises of itself. The ishtalut de the striving of Holy Blessed One to know Him. See, that is called free because it is the easy way. Yes, it's difficult to bypass our cravings, but it's still easier than what's ahead of us, which is actually a greater level of knowledge. But still, it is easy because we can do it. And it can be done. So we've been saying the whole process again. Like one of the shy question that came up to me was that we said that Diberot and Ma'amarot are speech, and then there's Blima. So seems like these Sfirot of the Diberot and the Ma'amarot are Sfirot B'Mila. They are the Sfirot enclosed within the word, within Mila, within a Milata Alashon Milata Ma'or. Again, Milata Ma'or will be this idea that God created the universe. Milata Lashon, maybe that is the Diberot, God speaking. So we see that the Sfirot, in this sense, are the Sfirot of Bemila, with the word, not Sfirot of Blima. But again, there is a reflection of how we're experiencing it. So in order for us to experience those Sfirot, even the Dibrot and the Ma'amarot, we have to find our own silence. We have to find our own Atzilut within us, our own Chokhmah, the quietude that we have to find our own Blima. And then when we find our own Blima, then we can hear God's Bemila. See, that's how I kind of see it, like that. And he says, Haino hayidi'at mano tenshim rech bechinam. He says, the knowledge itself, that is to say, the knowledge itself, God gives bechinam, freely. So he says that we don't require effort, we don't require action, doesn't require any positive mitzvahs. Earlier on he said, I didn't bring it, but earlier on he says, God brings this Ishtadlut D'Oraita manifests on account of Sur Mirah. Sur Mirah is opposed to the asset of. Sur Mirah means refrain from evil, and the asset of means and do good. So there are two parallels. There is the mitzvot lot aseh and the mitzvot aseh. Mitzvot aseh require action, require doing. Mitzvot lot aseh require non-doing. So he says that earlier on he says that Ishtadlut D'Oraita comes from on account of a minor tzimtzum, a minor constriction from within ourselves, from Sur Mirah. So when we can do Sur Mirah, when we can refrain, we stop, we slow down, we go in, our noise goes down, and then we can hear. And that is free. Why is it free? Because we don't have to do anything. We do nothing. We access it through doing nothing, through the non-doing. And so there's a parallel here. So again, maybe this explains why we've been talking about Ratzu V'Shov as Shuv Lamakom, returning to silence, and Ratzu as running to speech. But within Chassidut, within Baal Shem Tov, and within Rabbi Nachman, we see that Ratzu is running to God and Shuv is returning to ourselves. So it's actually the opposite. So maybe that explains kind of how we mirror Itarota de la Tata, Itarota de la Ila. We have Itarota de la Tata, which is the awakening from below, and that initiates an awakening from above. So again, we see this in the Gra also, he says there is perspectives in this place. And then also connects to the Or Choser, so we see, look in the Ramchal's Klach V'Tzchei Chochma, you see that he explains this idea that the direct light and the reflected light, which we connected with Keter and Chochma previously, that so the Ramchal there explains that reflected light is a opposing kind of direction of Sfirot. He says that in direct light, Keter is Keter, Chochma is Chochma, Bina is Bina, but in the reflected light, so in directed light, that's how it is. In reflected light, Malchut becomes Keter, Yesod becomes Chochma, etc. And so there is this pairing up there. So it could be that in a mitzidin, from our perspective, this is how we manifest it. From God's side, it's a bit different. So this is the Itarot de la Tata, the awakening from below. So that's why it's free, because we don't have to do anything. For the opposite, we literally do nothing. We don't even think. What that is to say that the knowledge itself, we don't have to do anything for it. God gives it to us for free. Where did he say? Just because of the silence and the purification of their consciousness, they were able to see they would hear God's word of itself without doing anything. He says after God gave it to us, again, it's another way of looking at it. God gave it to us for free because it's passing. It's Kemari HaBazak. It's coming and going. It doesn't stay permanently. It's Ratzu V'Shov. Because it is easy, this is what I said earlier on in the beginning when I summarized it, because it is easy to come, it is easy to go, and therefore אחר כך חזר העולם לראש כמקודם, the noise comes back. So we sit and be silent for a bit and the noise comes back. And that is a depressing experience. The noise comes back כמקודם, על ידי הטרדות, the distractions, הכוחות, המטרידים, and the forces of distraction. בעולם in the world כמו קודם, just before, like before, מתן תורה, the giving of Torah, ונסתר מהם, והפסיקום לשמור כמקודם, and and this is going back into מתן תורה, and the voice of God was hidden from them, and they stopped hearing, as just as they had been before. They were at Har Sinai. B'lifnehem nidmeh, and therefore to the Bnei Israel, to the Am Yisrael at Matan Torah, they imagined that God had suddenly started speaking in the beginning. Because they didn't hear it up until now. They didn't have the consciousness to realize that God had silenced their own desires. ואחר מתן תורה נדמה להם שהפסיקו לדבר, and after Matan Torah they believed, they imagined, they appeared to them that God stopped speaking. ובאמת השינוי היא מצידם, that the truth is that the change is from their perspective and from our perspective only. It is the voice of God is always there, manifesting, emanating continually, but it is because of us and our distractions and our inability to surmera, to refrain from doing, that we lose that connection from it. But again, this is where the question is, but we always have to do something. We have to eat, we have to do these actions, and that is why the next step after we have experienced Matan Torah, after we've heard the voice of God, we have the next one, which is Ishtadlut D'Oraita, which is very expensive. Ishtadlut the mitzvah, which is expensive, which is hard work. The real work of enlightenment is not the experience of awakening, not the experience of emptiness or silence. It is the work afterwards, which is to realize in our bones, in our body, that God manifests it. The real work, like I saw in Jerry Rosenfeld's series on Morgenstern. I'll bring it in his name because I think I'd point you to that as well. The Entering the Sea of Wisdom, it's available as a podcast. So he talks there, one of the episodes, about the Maggid towards the end of his life, the Maggid of Medrash, towards the end of his life, he spent his time on the lower unity. And the question arises, why did he spend his life on the lower unity? Surely at the end of his life he'd spend his life on the upper unity. And Morgenstern he says that the reason why is because the lower unity is harder. The upper unity is easy. It's very easy to come to a realization of God, actually, comparatively. It is hard to maintain that in our hearts, and that is the real work. That is the lifelong work. Ishtadlut the mitzvah. And he says, the change is within us. Because it is easy to come, it is easy to go. But when we experience brightness, when we experience light, we think that we are going to continually remain there. It is just a one-off thing that we're going to retire and that's it. It's going to perpetually maintain. וזהי מחמת שבאמת רצון השם ברח שישאר בקביעות מהאור. The reason for that is because that's what God actually wants. God wants us to be maintained permanently in this light. Why? שבאמת היי קלה לה פסיק. Because in truth this voice does not end, never ended. כמו שכתוב, as it is written, קול גדול ולא יסף. I'm not sure what the actual nikud there is there. Like it says in the pasuk we saw before, a great voice and no more. Kol devarav chaim v'kaimim, all of God's words are live and permanent. Right? So that's the end of the section. I'm reading it from a different page. So I'm not sure what you've got in front of you. Maybe nothing, it looks like. Yeah, that is what you've got there. So God's voice endures forever, because that's what God wants from us. He wants that continuity. He wants that continuity. Like I said, the midrash on the pasuk of Kol Gadol Lo Yasef, what a great voice but never more. It says that all the prophets after, maybe even before, always prophesied from that single voice. They only heard the voice they heard is that one voice, and that voice manifested in different ways. Manifested as different teachings, different mitzvot, different messages for different generations. Right, that was a really beautiful idea. And like I said, I recommend, if you have access to it. There's actually on Hebrew Books you can see that you have access to that Beit Yaakov. It's not on Safari, unfortunately. They've only got Sefer Bereshit there, so this isn't Sefer Shemot. So, but if you have access to Hebrew Books, which if you have access to the internet, you have access to Hebrew Books, and you have the understanding of the Hebrew and Aramaic, go and look at it. It's hard, but if you look up the Midrash and look up the Zohar and Psukim, the Gemara, it'll bring clarity to it. And there's actually another section which if you ask me, I can send you, which is a shorter version of it. But again, that is the end of it. This is what we've done now. I've just shown you that this is a preliminary concept. This is the Ishtalut D'Oraita, the beginning of seeing, hearing God's voice in the world. But the next step is Ishtadlut Mitzvah, which is what we're going to see later on. We're going to see running later on. Which is that. So Ishtadlut Mitzvah is the running. That's why I said that. Ishtadlut Mitzvah is the running. It requires great effort, but the rewards are greater. Like I said, the Beit Yaakov says that the truths, the Divrei Torah, the revelation of God is deeper and higher and more permanent, more fixed within mitzvah than it is within Torah. So that's what we're going to start seeing. But what we're going to be looking at next, from now on, we're going to be moving on to the next section of the Sefer Yetzirah, which still talks about the Sfirot. Like I said, it's the Sfirot B'milah rather than the Sfirot B'lima. And then we're going to start moving on. And we're going to start seeing how the whole thing, if you want a taste of what it's there, the rest of the Sefer Yetzirah is going to be Ratzu V'Shov. So we're going to be seeing how there's going to be these parallel paths. So on one level, the mitzvah is how do we manifest it? It's a kind of an outward looking. We're looking out at the world, doing our things, and manifesting God's knowledge within our actions. But at the same time, we're also going to see how, however far we are, we can take those aspects and then return. So we're going to be running with mitzvah, running with halacha, or walking with halacha, running with how that Torah manifests, but also walking back and finding a way that however far we are, we can return and trace it back. So we're going to be doing this movement back and forth now. So up until now, we've just been doing shuv because we've been hinted at ratzu, this there a little bit, and we're going to be going back to it, referring back to the first section all the time. Next section is going to be intermediate. We're still talking about Sfirot. So we're going to be the intermediate section of it. We're going to be talking about Vashov in a different context, from a little bit further away. What we've been doing is like a very difficult way of doing it. Stop thinking, stop speaking. That's very hard. So we're going to be doing an easier way, looking at different techniques, and then we'll start expanding and seeing where it goes. So thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week.